Get started. We're going to have a word of prayer. I forgot to mention the last time. Sister Young is not with us because she is sick. And so we're going to have prayer and we're going to mention her. Okay? And I'm going to ask Brother Josh, if he wouldn't mind, to lead us in that prayer and be sure to mention Sister Young and anyone else that we need to mention. Let's go ahead and pray. Okay, we're going to start in chapter 19 here. I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to rely on the fact that y'all have read the book at least twice by now. And so I'm not going to read the verses because as we explain the Proverbs, we're going to understand what we're talking about. And what we've been talking about or what's been taking place up to this point, and it's going to change here in a little while, is there has basically been, per verse, there's been a proverb. And within that proverb, usually what's happening is it talks about a positive and it comes with a negative, okay, a lot of the time. So that's kind of been the format here. Now, that's going to change here in a couple chapters. Solomon is going to begin to cover a proverb over the course of 2 to 4 or 5 verses. And so he's going to spend a little more time writing about a particular idea or thought. Okay? But right now, kind of what we're doing is there's basically a proverb per verse. And so what we're going to do is just kind of talk about that. Chapter 19. Solomon begins talking about, he starts off talking about honesty. Honesty, God requires honesty. What was one of under the law of Moses, what was one of the 10 Commandments? Thou shalt not lie. Be honest. Paul said, talking to the Ephesians, stop lying. Stop stealing. Things like that. We're not going to behave like we used to behave. So we're going to stop being dishonest. Even if that means we are going to have to live in poverty. It's better to live in poverty than to go to hell a rich person. Now we go back to the account Jesus told of the rich man Lazarus. That always comes to mind, doesn't it? It's better to be in paradise a poor man than to be in torments a very rich man, a very wealthy man. What was the rich man's wealth benefiting him after he died? Zero. Do you imagine that he would have given everything he ever had in life to get out of where he was? And more. Even for just a moment. Even for just a drop of water off the finger of Lazarus, he would have probably traded everything that he had ever had. He goes on to here, he goes on to talk about it is never good for the soul to be without knowledge. Period. Knowledge, period. We need to always be learning. Even secular knowledge is good for us. When Christianity is a balanced life, okay? When Paul said, always be praying, did he mean that we prayed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year? No. He meant that it was a regular part of your life. When you study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the Word of God. Does that mean that you study the Word of God exclusively, and that's all you do every single day? No, that cannot possibly be right, because you also have to work, because if you will not work, what should you not do? Eat. So we better be working. And I don't know very many people who make their working of the gospel or make their living of the gospel. Very few of us that do that. And so we have to do other things. And plus, it's about a balanced life, okay? You know, I was so shocked when I went to school, and maybe it was because I was a little older and I had some experience, and I think that's probably a good idea. I think, Brother Jim, you had some experience prior to going to the school of preaching, didn't you? Okay, I was even older than that. I was, Brother Jim was 32. I was almost 37. So we had some life experience. And so what that means is, when you talk to someone, you're able to talk to them about some things other than just the Bible. And I'm not saying that, obviously, it's bad to talk to someone about the Bible. That's what I do. But you have to handle different people sometimes in different ways, right? They have to understand you care about them as a person, and you're not just after a number sitting in the pew upstairs. Because that's the way some people think, and it's not our fault they think that way. It's the false teachers of the world who have made merchandise out of religion. Okay? So, you need to be able to talk to people about different things. And when Paul said, I'm all things to all men, I don't believe for a second he meant, well, I'm going to change my doctrine for this person. I'm going to change my doctrine to satisfy this person. That's not at all what he meant. He meant I can meet this person where they are in life and begin where they are. Whether they're ignorant, and I don't mean that as an insult, whether they're uneducated or whether they're highly educated. He could talk to a man who made a living with his hands. Why? Because he made a living with his hands. He could talk to someone who was highly educated because he was highly educated. He was all things to all people. That's what we have to be. So, back to what my point was, when I went to school, I began to talk to these preacher students, and the only thing they knew how to talk about was the Bible. It's great to be able to talk about the Bible. But if all you know how to talk about is the Scripture, some people begin to think, well, maybe you're a little odd, and I don't know if I want to have anything to do with you. You have to be able to talk about normal, everyday things and get to know people. Right? I mean, at least that's the way I looked at it. That doesn't mean it's right, but I saw that as being balanced, okay? Being balanced. And so you need knowledge, and Solomon tells us that here, so it must be true. Knowledge will expand the mind. It'll enable us to make intelligent choices in life. We have to make choices in life about other things than spiritual things. So we have to have knowledge about those things, okay? If you want to learn how to build onto a house, Brother Jim is your man, because he's been doing it now for a good while. He's absolutely remodeled the whole house over in Owens. He knows how to do it. Does it all himself. Okay? If you want to talk about building a house, Reggie's your man. He's been doing it for years. Okay? But if you want to talk about biblical-based things and scriptural things, these two men are elders. Okay? If you want to talk about building a motor, Josh is your guy. But he's also one of our elders. He can talk to you about spiritual things. That's what Solomon's talking about. You have to be able to make choices in life. The knowledge of God's Word will prevent a multitude, Solomon says, of hurtful errors in this life. There can be no salvation without knowing God. We must know God. And without growing in one's knowledge of God's Word, we're not going to get to heaven. So, in addition to having other knowledge, we must absolutely have the knowledge of God. He expects it. He demands it. That ought to take precedence in our lives. We need to have that. Solomon doesn't want us to act too quickly without proper study. Have you ever seen anyone make a real snap decision and then they say, oh boy, I shouldn't have done that? Hey, I know someone who's done that before, and he's talking to you. Okay? And I'm thinking, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Well, I don't do that so much anymore because I've gotten older and I've learned. Hopefully I'm a little wiser than I used to be. So I think about things now. I don't just make a decision. You have to weigh the consequences, the pros and the cons. Do I need to do it? Do I not need to do it? I was telling Paula one day, when I worked in the body shop, you know, a lot of guys bought tools, and it was almost like they just bought tools because they were in love with tools. Look, I'm in love with them too. I love them. It's like books. But I would not buy tools unless I could make money with them. And so I remember I bought a 1/4-inch air ratchet. I did a lot of front end work. People hit deer or whatever. And so I was tearing down front ends of cars. And I had a 3/8-inch ratchet, and that doesn't get into all the small places real good. And so, of course, this has been 20 years ago. The Snap-on guy came around. He had a 1/4-inch ratchet, air ratchet. It was $110. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot. It was a whole lot 20-something years ago, especially if I hadn't decided whether or not I can make money with it. And so I looked at it for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, and finally I bought it. I was sick to death when he drove out of the parking lot. You talk about buyer's remorse. I didn't even open the box for a month. I said, I'm giving it back. Finally, one day I was working on the front end of a car, and I was having trouble, so I was just out of frustration opened up that box, and I had that car torn down in 1/3 of the time. I said, boy, I can make money with this thing. So it paid for itself on that job. But, see, you have to have knowledge, and you have to not make just a real snap decision, because it might just very well come back and get you. I've known people who've gotten married 2 days into knowing each other. Look, that's not wise. That's not wise, okay? People get themselves into trouble by ignoring God's Word. Then they blame God for their problems. People blame God for their problems anyway. But especially if you ignored what God said, it's just like, growing up as a child. My dad would advise me on something after I had gotten to the point where I was making my own decisions. And I would ignore that advice. Now, I didn't do that a whole lot, but I did do it. And then it would turn out just exactly like he said it would, and then I would be upset. Now, I never would say much to him about it, but he could tell I was upset, and he would ask me. He'd say, well, what's the problem? You like it, don't you? Because you evidently wanted it. Because I told you not to do it, or I told you to do it. He had a certain way to really rub me to get the point across. But we can't be angry with God. When things go well, we ought to give God all the credit. When things go bad, whose fault is it? It's our fault. It's not God's fault. What James say about the things that come from God? Good and perfect gifts come down from the Father of lights. All of them. Not the bad things. Not the bad things. He talks about bribery again. Guarding against flattery. Guarding against bribery. We've talked about that. The poor is often unwelcome by neighbors. He's talking here when he comes asking for help. He's shunned by friends, strangers, and relatives. And if he pursues them with pleas for help, he is despised and remains in need. If we seek wisdom with diligence until we gain it, we're showing love for our own souls. So, doesn't it stand to reason, if we do not seek diligence or seek wisdom with diligence, we're not demonstrating love? And it goes back to that statement that Paul made to Timothy. Study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed. If we're not studying to show ourselves approved unto God, shouldn't we be ashamed? Because if we have no reason to be ashamed, if we are doing it, if we're not doing it, well, by necessity, we ought to be ashamed, right? So there is an opposite truth to the truth if we're not doing it. And so that's exactly what we're talking about here. In verses 10 through 18. Verse 10, Solomon talks about two inappropriate situations. It is unseemly for a fool to have delight, It is even more unseemly for a servant to rule over a prince. Okay? Fools and eloquent speech do not belong together. Are you going to get your advice from someone who is a knowing fool, even if he can speak good? He has flowery speech, and he sounds like he might be able to know what he's talking about. You know, anyone can have a speechwriter, can't they? Anyone can have a speechwriter. Don't politicians do it every day? And you know good and well, they might not fall into this smart category. They might be falling into this other category, because I think a lot of them are foolish. But boy, can they speak. They speak well. That's why they got to where they're at, right? And so, but fools and eloquent speech do not belong together. Honor and fools are strangers. Fools, there is no honor among fools. There's no honor among thieves. And maybe those two go together. Okay? Here Solomon is talking about prosperity and fools are strange and an unlikely pair. Imagine a dishonest man in a position of power. Wouldn't there be too many situations, and I think we see that in our nation right now, dishonest people in positions of power, and the opportunity for innocent people to be mistreated. I think that happens. Solomon is speaking against it, and through God, Solomon is speaking against it. He teaches here the needed lesson of self-control in high-pressure situations. Anyone can have good self-control when they're sitting at home alone, right? We're all under control then. We're talking about high-pressure situations where we need to behave. We need to be under control. People are watching. People know we're members of the Lord's church. We need to have self-control. Demas was a man who could not control himself. He could not control himself. And so we need to be able to control ourselves. It is easy to be rude. It is easy to insult people. It is easy to misbehave. It's harder to not do that when you are receiving that treatment. Now, who's our great example? Jesus. He was mistreated, the ultimate mistreatment. Beaten, spat on, spoken to, the worst that anyone's ever been spoken to, and he did not revile back. He did not offer railing for railing. You know, what's the old saying? Men go where angels fear to tread. You know, and that's the truth. Wisdom and spirituality will lead one to overlook offenses. However, when a brother trespasses against us, and this is something we need to understand, we are taught to show him his fault for whose good? For whose good? His good. His good. If he's not told he's in the wrong, well, we're not demonstrating love to him. That's why we have church discipline. That's what 1 Corinthians chapter 5 is about. They thought they were so in love and teaching such good love to this brother who was in an illicit sexual relationship with his stepmother. They said, oh, look how much we love him. Because we're not saying anything about his sin he's involved in. Now, this is talking about a personal sin against someone, but it's the same application. If I sin against Bob, and he doesn't let me know that, I might not even know that. You can sin against someone and not really be aware of it. And now, more often than not, you're aware of it, but you can have a situation where you're not aware of it. And so you need to go to that brother and say, hey, look, this is a situation. And even if you are aware of it, he still needs to come to you and say, look, you did this. But for my good. For my good. Okay? And plus, he doesn't need to harbor ill will because that's not good for him. And that's what happens, isn't it? That's what happens. And so we need to be able and be aware of that. Those in governmental charge are still people. They still have the same shortcomings as everyone Solomon talks about. And in verse 2, may be a caution for citizens not to expect too much. Okay? Not to expect too much. If we expect a lot from those who are in charge of our government, and we ought to expect a lot from them, but I think what Solomon is saying here is, don't get your hopes up too high because they're still people. They're still people. And especially when you're dealing with people who aren't godly people. Certainly don't get your hopes up there. That's why it's important, brethren, I believe, to vote. I think it's important to vote. And vote for the most godly person you can vote for, because how often do Christians run for office? I don't know that I've ever seen anyone that was a Christian run for office. Maybe I have. I don't know. I'm not thinking of it. But I don't know. Certainly no president. I can't think of a governor. Huh? President? Yeah, I think he was a disciple. But you're talking about Garfield. I think he was a disciple. So I don't know if he was a member of the church. He may have been, but well, yeah. I don't know if he was a member of the church. He was a believer in God. That's the closest we've ever come, probably. But I can't think of very many people who's ever been members of the Lord's church. So what do we do in a case like that? You get the best out of the bunch. You vote for the one who's going to do the closest to what God would want us to do, because God ordained government. He ordained government. So let's try to get the best in there we can get in there. Solomon warns how a foolish son, again, is a grievous burden to his father, and a contentious wife is like a continual dripping of water. Have you ever heard about the Chinese water torture? Drip, 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 right in the floor. Drip, 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 drip. Well, now does this just apply to contentious wives? No. I wish it did. Nope. Contentious husbands too, right? Contentious husbands as well. That wears on your nerves after a while, doesn't it? A continuous dripping in the back. Anyone who's contentious that you live with will wear you down. It'll wear on your nerves. The inheritance of ancient days was passed from father to son. So the father in the family was the one who received the house and the riches as head of the family. But his position also came with responsibility. His wealth always came from the father. That's how it was. But if he had a good wife, her worth was much greater than the material blessings that he inherited from his father. And we're going to notice that when we get over to Proverbs 31 if we get there. Here again, the wise man addresses the stupidity of laziness. We won't spend any time with that. Verse 18 is good counsel for sincere parents. We continually see this. Corporal punishment is necessary in bringing up children. We've talked about this. We're not going to spend any more time on it, but parents spank their children not because they want to. They do it because it's necessary. Verses 19 through 21. A man of wrath will fall victim to his own foolishness time and time again. Have you ever worked around someone or been around someone who had a very quick and mean temper? Listen, that's harsh. That's hard. I worked for a fellow like that for 14 years. Fortunately, I loved him. And so I didn't pay that much attention to it. But you didn't know what you're going to get when you went in. You know. He'd get ready to go home, and right after he left, I'd get a phone call, and his family would be like, what kind of mood is he in? I'd just hang up. I said, I had to tolerate it all day. Good luck. You know, I wouldn't even tell him. But it can be rough, to be around someone who is just full of anger. He finally kind of got straightened out a little bit, but it can be hard on you. And what he's talking about here, what Solomon's talking about here, someone who has that type of an attitude just goes from one bad situation to the other, doesn't he? It's always someone else's fault. It's always someone else's fault. No, it's not. It's like my aunt. I had an aunt. She's passed on now. She was married 8 times. Brethren, she was married 8 times. I finally told her one time, I said, "Hey, maybe it's you. Maybe it's you. Been married 8 times. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was her. I loved her, but she wasn't wife material. And so that's one of the reasons we want to discipline our children. We want to train them not to behave that way as they move into adulthood. The New King James Version translates, "What is desired in a man is kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar." It's a little better than the King James Version. Kindness is loved and appreciated by most people. I think most people will appreciate kindness. Even people who are unkind will appreciate people being kind to them, because along with unkindness usually comes selfishness, and they kind of expect people to be kind to them. And so that is appreciated. One who is kind will normally kind of be accepted by other people. If you go out of your way to be kind, normally even people who are hard to get along with will kind of get along with you a little bit because you're kind to them. And so that's one of the reasons that you want to be kind to people. Okay, it helps you with getting along. Listen, it's easy not to be kind. Okay, that's not hard. But is it hard to be kind to some people sometimes? Listen, we are supposed to love the brethren. Paul demanded it. That's an order. Are all the brethren easy to love? No, I'm one of them. Hard to love me sometimes. But you know what I like to say? You got to. Paul said you did. So you just got to love me. And you got to forgive me when I apologize. That's just what it is, right? And so, but you've got to be kind, and you have to love each other. And so these are wonderful proverbs that will affect and enhance our lives if we will follow them. They were just as true these many thousand years ago as they are right now. Even when opposing Satan and his followers, one must still incorporate love. We teach the truth in love. Let me tell you what I heard one time, and this still bothers me as much today as it did years ago. And I'm talking, this happened almost 20 years ago, and it sticks out in my mind. I was sitting in a Bible class. A deacon was teaching it in Memphis. It was a deacon who said this. There were at least 2 elders in the class. There was a young couple in there who were from Louisiana, and they had just been married. She was a fairly new convert. Since they were from Louisiana, she came out of the Catholic religion. And this one deacon was sitting there, and he told this joke. He said, "What's the difference?" And he named off all these denominations. He included the denomination her family was. He said, "What's the difference in that?" And someone said, I don't know. He said, "Nothing. They're all going to hell." And about half the people in that class just belly laughed. None of the 2 elders said a word. The deacon teaching didn't say a word. And I had just moved to Memphis to go to school, and I was sitting in there, and I was just in such shock that was said that I didn't say a word. And that has tortured me for 20 years almost. I was just flabbergasted that someone, a member of the Lord's, I don't know why it would surprise me. I guess because it was in such a public way, maybe. I don't know. But that hurt me so bad for that young girl. And that the two elders didn't say anything. Two of the elders didn't say anything. The deacon didn't say anything. But the thing that bothered me more than anything was I didn't say anything. And it's just like business as usual. And that has never left me. I think about that at least every week of my life. You know, I preached a sermon yesterday. Decisions are important. Decisions are important. They're very important because they will follow you the rest of your life. And there's not a thing you can do about it. You can be forgiven, but they'll still torture you. They tortured Paul, didn't they? They tortured Paul. And so we got to be careful. We got to be careful. Solomon, again, talks about the grossly lazy person in verse 24. He's so lazy, brethren, he will not even feed himself. While there are those who are lazy in life, the scary part and the worst part is those who are lazy spiritually. Listen, we cannot be lazy spiritually. And it's easy to fall into... listen, I've done it, okay? And it's not because we want to do it. It's because we get busy or we get something else on our minds. We start doing something and we get lazy spiritually. We have to continually examine ourselves. Paul said, examine yourself. You know whether you're in the faith or not. And what he meant was, you know whether you're being faithful or not. Because he's talking to Christians. Okay? So let's not be spiritually lazy. A lazy person spiritually will starve themselves by ignoring the Bible. If we took a baby home and that little fella didn't gain any weight, he didn't grow, when we took him back to the doctor for the first checkup and there was no changes. Now, of course, sometimes they lose a little weight, but you get into it a little bit and they're not progressing. What are we going to do? Hey, we need to go see somebody. We want to go see a specialist. We got a problem on our hands. But brethren, we will teach someone the gospel, and it's almost like we turn them loose. Good luck. We can't do that. We can't do that. We got to figure something out. I'm as guilty of that as anyone. The punishment of evildoers is an object lesson for others in verse 25. If a scoffer is exposed, those who are gullible or willing to hear and do will learn from that. We need to expose the wicked and the evil. Do we need to expose false teachers? 100%. We need to expose them. 100%. We need to make sure people know what they're dealing with. If there was a doctor, let me give you an example. There was a doctor up in Crossville, Tennessee. This has been, I don't know, 10 years ago maybe. She was a cancer doctor, and she was diluting the chemo. The chemo. She was diluting it by half. Because, guess what that helped her do? Make more money. Well, people were dying. They weren't getting better. Well, they got her. They had her in all the newspapers. She lost her license. She couldn't practice medicine. You know what? Good. She needed to be exposed. So how much more do we need to expose a false teacher? What's worse, to lose your physical life or go to hell for eternity? It's much worse to go to hell for eternity. Look, this life is short, brethren. It's not going to last very long. But we need to expose evildoers. And that's an object lesson. If an understanding person is reproved, he's going to gain knowledge from that, okay? That's another lesson he gives here. The fool will not learn from that, okay? But a prudent person, an understanding person, he will learn from being rebuked, okay? Paul learned from being rebuked. I try to learn from being rebuked. I don't always. I'm working on my prudence. But, that's the goal, right? And so that's what we need to do. We have another example of a foolish child here. He wastes his father's wealth and he chases his mother away from home. Solomon here called on his son to stop giving heed to instruction which caused him to stray away from the path of knowledge. Did he do that, by the way? Did Rehoboam listen to his daddy? He certainly did not. Here's why. He couldn't overcome the example. You can tell your son and your daughters all you want to, and it can be the truth, but if they cannot overcome the example, it doesn't matter. Rehoboam could not overcome the example. Now, that we're not taking any of the responsibility away from Rehoboam, but Solomon is to blame for a large portion of that. He talks about the false witness again. Listen, that's lying. That puts people in danger. He talks in verse 29 about those who laugh about sin and scorn and righteousness. You know, it is sickening to me to hear people laugh about sinful things. It is just sickening to me. I can't stand that. You can't, used to, I love comedy, but there is no good comedy anymore. There is one, I found one site called Dry Bar Comedy that is not filthy. And it's pretty funny. Okay? But, I can't believe it. I couldn't believe it when I came across it. My daughter put me onto it. Okay? There are a couple of comedians out there that aren't filthy. But to laugh and to laugh about sinful things, there was I can't remember her name, a comedian. I think I might have mentioned this a class or two ago. She was so happy that she had had an abortion in her younger years. She was just so thankful that she was able to do that. Well, that's laughing and making fun of God's laws is what that is. Any comments, questions? Let's look in verse 20 here, chapter 20. The history of the world from the days of Noah, verses 1 through 11, has proven, and he's talking about drinking alcohol, has proven the love of wine and strong drink is a terrible and harmful vice. Tell me when drinking alcohol has ever improved anyone's life. When has it ever made a family stronger? When has it ever made someone work harder? When has it made a business better? When the employers showed up drunk on the job or drinking on the job. You don't even have to be falling down drunk. You can just be in the beginning stages of drunkenness. When has it ever happened to make anything better? Well, it never has. See, and the liquor companies, the beer companies, you don't see it on the advertisements. All you see is the good-looking girls on the good-looking cars selling the beer, selling the wine, selling the liquor, the hard drinks, the spirits. It is power, its power is so overcoming to the person. I've got an uncle. I haven't seen him in years, but I worked for him in the summer sometimes, and he would be drunk every single day after work. Now, he was a functioning drunk. Never drank during the day. Everybody loved his work. He did the work. He did a great job. Every evening, he would be drunk. Every single evening. He couldn't get away from it. Caused him problems in his family. It caused all, I could go into it for days, the problems it caused. It never helped his business. It never helped his family. It didn't help his children. One of his children became a drug addict. It's a sad thing. Alcohol's a drug. You're a drug addict if you drink alcohol. But only a fool and a slave consents to be mocked again and again, Solomon says. And that's the alcohol, mocking you again and again. Later in Proverbs, we learn, Proverbs 31, beginning of verse 4, that alcohol is not for kings, O Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. There are numerous reasons why alcohol is not to be touched. Numerous reasons. But it is condemned in the Bible. I would have a lot more respect for someone who just said, look, I like to drink alcohol, instead of blaming God for being a bootlegger, for saying Jesus was a bootlegger. Because when you come up with this lie that he turned water into alcoholic wine at the wedding feast in Cana in John chapter 2, what you've done is you've relegated the Savior of the world to being a bootlegger. And I don't agree with that. I don't believe it. He would have broken the old law. He would have sinned. And he did not sin. And so I don't believe for a second that he was a bootlegger. There's nothing social about drinking. When we look at Ephesians 5:19, it says, be not drunk with wine. When we do the, and I'm going to put some stuff together for us and hand it out next time. That word drunk means the beginning stages, to be softened with wine. You're not talking about being fallen down drunk. It's talking about drinking, period. The very beginning stages. You can take one sip and now it's in your system. That's the beginning stages of drunkenness. That's what the word intends, and that's what it means. It is not permissible, okay? And even if, let's just say, even if you were allowed to take a drink, what kind of influence are you being on other people? You're not. Now, don't misunderstand me. You're not. But what kind of influence are you being on other people? You're killing your influence. They're seeing you go into the liquor store. They're watching you go into the bar. You're being around people and associating with people you should not associate with, and participating in things you should not participate in. Drunkenness is forbidden. Now, and people want to misunderstand this word wine. Wine is a generic term. I have it in your notes. Oinos. Oinos refers to the grape, refers to alcohol, refers to the grape juice. So you have to look at the context of the writing to understand what it's talking about. And when we look at the Lord's Supper, you know, we have to be careful with being enamored with brethren, and because we trust them, we just take their word for it. Let me tell you, I think Brother Guy Woods was amazing in a lot of ways. Boy, he missed it on this. He said you could use alcoholic wine on the Lord's table. Do you know at no place in the New Testament is the Lord's Supper ever referred to, the grape juice referred to as wine? Never. It could be. That doesn't hurt, because wine can be grape juice. But it's not. At no place is it ever referred to as that. But Brother Woods thought you could use alcoholic wine on the Lord's table. It's in the questions and answers at Freed Hardeman. I've got the book. I was so disappointed when I read that. Now, brethren, that's not proper. That's not allowed. Okay? Just because you've made it out of the fruit of the vine doesn't mean it is allowed, because it goes against the type. Goes against the type. They would have not had anything that had leaven in it. What did they have to do on the Passover? They had to sweep their houses out, didn't they? They had to get rid of all that leaven. They wouldn't have had alcoholic wine. And that's what he used to institute the supper. Grape juice. Unleavened bread. And the one who believes that he can control his desire for alcohol while drinking it socially or moderately, he's playing the fool. It's not possible. And it affects our thinking ability. It affects our being sober. And we're supposed to be sober and be vigilant. We're supposed to guard against the wiles of the devil, because he's like a roaring lion, Peter said, right? Alcohol will not allow us to do that. And that's from the very first beginning effects of that. Any comments, questions? Absolutely, it alters your mind. And here's the thing. People, Paul prescribed wine for Timothy's stomach. He very well could have prescribed alcoholic wine because he had some kind of a bug in his gut. And wine would kill that, alcohol would kill that bug in his gut if he did. Now, when you look at the qualifications for elders and deacons, deacons are not to be given to much wine. So people have tried to use that to say, well, see, there you go, you can drink a little wine. No, that's not what that's saying at all. You have to say, well, what's much? Well, what's much when you look at that? Much is more than what's prescribed, more than what's allowed. Well, in Timothy's case, he was given something for medicinal purposes. Okay? They didn't have, you couldn't run down to see the kind of access to medicines that we had then. They didn't have that then like we do now. So they had to use things like alcoholic wine or whatever. Brethren, I wouldn't use that now today simply because of the influence I might have on someone. You know, as far as a cough syrup goes, that's about the only kind of cough syrup that would work on me, that or that cough syrup that you get's got a little codeine in it. So I'm just out of luck when it comes to cough syrup because you can't even get codeine cough syrup anymore. So I'm out of luck. I just cough, okay? Because I'm not going to go mix up whiskey and honey. I'm not going to do it because I have to go buy that stuff somewhere. And I'm not going to take a chance on someone seeing me go buy a bottle of whiskey. I'm just not going to do it because I don't have to use that. I have a doctor I can go to that can prescribe something to me. Okay? That's what we have to consider. And there's 1,000 excuses people can use, but what we want to do is instead of making excuses, we want to please God. We do not want to participate in things like that. We're going to pick up here next time. If there is a next time, we'll see. But I'll get these notes out to you. But what we will do next time is I want to see the notes that you've taken, and I'll take that grade from that. But I don't want them right now in case we get an extra hour. All right, brethren, I appreciate you. Take a break.